Hi, I'm Michael Appel for BizNews.com. There's a saying, a week is a long time in politics. Well, yeah, that saying has rung pretty true lately. Last week, this time, the country was digesting the independent panel's report on Phala Phala, and Ramaphosa was writing his resignation speech off the back of a seemingly scathing report. The markets tumbled, the NEC hastily convened only to postpone the meeting. Then the ANC National Working Committee convened over the weekend, followed by another NEC sitting on Monday this week, in which Ramaphosa, who didn't show at the first NEC meeting, recused himself as he was literally the item on the agenda. The president ultimately opted to approach the Constitutional Court seeking to review the panel's report, and predictably so, the National Executive Committee of the governing party resolved it will instruct its MPs to vote against progressing to an impeachment inquiry. The ANC holds 230 seats in a 400-seat parliament. My standard grade maths tells me the next step in a three-step impeachment process could simply be a bridge too far. Is this the end of the story then? Will this whole saga be swept under the rug and we all just continue with our lives like we did when those defending Jacob Zuma tried to convince us a swimming pool was a fire pool and that chicken coops somehow play a role in upgrading his security? Chief Whip of the official opposition of the country, Siviwe Gwarube, joins me to help map possible scenarios going forward. Siviwe, I hope I didn't butcher your surname. Thank you so much for joining me.
You said it perfectly.
The programming committee in Parliament resolved to shift the debate on the report to Tuesday, the 13th of December. And I got to tell you, I don't know if you watched it, but around the hour, 5-minute mark, I absolutely loved when the power went out on the speaker. And she said what every South African says when the power goes out. She said, "Load shedding, my God." It was brilliant. How are you happy that it was shifted, and are you able to tell us how the DA will be voting on Tuesday and why?
Look, I think just straight off the bat, I think it's important to state that as the DA, we are of the view that Parliament had initiated this process. We had commissioned this report at great public cost. It's estimated that the true cost of this independent panel ranges at about 2 or 3 million rand. And so that is public money which was spent starting this process because a Section 89 process had been invoked by the ATM. And so when we all participated in nominating members of this panel, accepting the appointment of this panel, when the speaker appointed the panel, we all took responsibility, accountability, and ownership of the work that panel would do. And therefore, when the panel comes back and says, based on what we were able to look at, even though our scope of investigating is very limited, it looks only at the complicity of the president, the information that we received that was collated by opposition parties, and his responses to us and the questions we put to him, we are of the view that the president has some questions to answer for, and that he may have broken sections of the Constitution and by extension, broken his oath of office. Now, regardless of what you make of the quality of the report, the motive of the report, the reality is that everybody was behind the work of this panel, including the ANC, up until that very point where the panel found that the president may have broken his oath of office. And all of a sudden, the report is picked apart. And all of a sudden, the motives around the report are picked apart. And now the speaker is in a pickle because the president has now taken this report on review, and ultimately she is one of the respondents and is ought to represent all 400 of us who commissioned this report to take place in the first place. And so she ought to respond to that review and back the panel, because the panel has done the work that we expected it to do. in the confines of the rules that that are there. And so now the ANC, as disappointing as it is, we have heard that they've instructed the MPs, as you said, to vote against the report and the recommendations. And my one question is that I cannot seem to wrap my head around is that if you're president, as the president yourself, you are found to have potentially broken the law, and you're of the view that the findings of this report are false or they are flawed or whatever the case may be, you would want a process, an inquiry to be established so that you can have an opportunity to refute those claims, bring about evidence that perhaps you were not able to bring. You are able to ask the inquiry to subpoena people who might be able to shed some light on certain things that you were not able to do in the previous process. So it makes no sense to me that, one, you would even support your party voting against this process, because I would lobby them very much to not to. Secondly, it makes no sense to me that the ANC would, regardless of what the Constitution says, the rules of the National Assembly say, simply decide, well, because we don't like what this says, its life comes to an end now. But perhaps maybe it's my eternal optimism that has made me more confused or disappointed, because the ANC has done this before during the Nkandla debacle, as you said.
Yeah, I know you're preempting all my questions, Siviwe. How do you
Sorry.
How do you feel about the president seeking to take the report on review? Because an important distinction must be made. He's applying to the Constitutional Court. There's no 100% guarantee that this judicial review will be heard as yet. That's my understanding. Is that correct?
It is absolutely correct. And that's why even the legal opinion that the speaker sought about whether or not the matter is now sub judice and would prevent Parliament from voting on the matter next week, Tuesday, the legal opinion came back and said, well, the president hasn't interdicted Parliament. He's simply made an application. And so it is exactly just that. And of course, look, I mean, the president is within his rights, Michael, to seek to review the report if he believes that there are deep inaccuracies and that maybe his responses were misinterpreted, even though, that he was given an opportunity to respond in writing. But where, for me, the interesting thing is that this is going to be yet another test for the Speaker of the National Assembly, who has not covered herself in glory as it comes to being loyal to the National Assembly and to Parliament, and ridding herself of this notion that she's still an extension of the executive. Because if she's really committed to the institution, she has to make sure that she's guided by the rules and actually acts like the head of an institution which is independent from government.
Let me ask you then, could an impeachment inquiry, let's just say, hypothetically, 201 out of 400 MPs say, yes, let's go ahead. Could an impeachment inquiry run parallel to a legal challenge to the report that established it in the first place, if you know what I mean? Could those two run together?
Look, I suppose it will depend on the legal interpretation, because when I read the legal opinion by the Parliamentary Legal Services now, it seems to suggest that unless the process at some point is interdicted, there's nothing that's stopping Parliament from continuing with its business. So even if on Tuesday 50+1 people vote for the process to continue, from my reading of the legal opinion, it seems as though Parliament can continue until such a point as the matter is interdicted, or in fact, maybe then the president is successful in having the report reviewed, because then in that instance, the motivation or the cause of the establishment of the inquiry would have been based on false information if it is confirmed by the courts. And I think it is only then that you can then see a situation where Parliament would have to then consider where it stands legally.
Earlier this week, I spoke to Brett Herron of the Good Party, and while he didn't agree that Ramaphosa should resign, he did say that it makes sense if there are unsatisfactory answers or questions that still need interrogation, that, as you said, you would expect somebody who wants to clear their name to welcome the next part of the process, which is where people can be subpoenaed and you can give statements and all of that. It's a greater inquisitorial process than the independent panel. But so he even said, we would probably call for the next step. Is there consensus among opposition parties on how Tuesday's vote should go, or is it, each one to himself?
I'm actually surprised that the Good Party has taken that stance, because they don't often side with opposition parties in Parliament on particularly of matters pertaining to holding the executive to account. And so I'm pleasantly surprised, and I hope that we can count on the minister's votes and his votes, which I think might go down very awkwardly in the next cabinet meeting.
A little bit, yeah.
But nonetheless, look, I think there is general consensus, and and people have often asked us about, some of the opposition parties work together on certain things and not on certain things. But I think on this matter, particularly as it pertains to how do we make sure that Parliament retains its independence and really holds the executive to account, and holds the president to account, and has a proper oversight mechanism in place, I think most opposition parties can agree. And I think most opposition parties will be voting to establish an impeachment inquiry next week. It doesn't mean we agree on everything, which I think is healthy, because, of course, Michael, I mean, we all know that we are not all motivated by the same things. Ours really is not about inserting ourselves in the internal machinations of ANC, factional battles. Really, it is about holding on and saving the soul of the institution. There has been a hollowing out of Parliament in a really tragic way over years. And, unless we really fight hard, the fire will not just be a physical fire that's destroyed the buildings, but it could also have marked the destruction of an institution so important to South Africans. And so really it's about showing that it doesn't matter who you are. If you break the law, whether you're the president of the country or you are my mother from KwaMdingi, you will be held accountable in the same way. And I think that's the basis of a constitutional democracy. And so really it's got nothing to do with whether or not we think, there's a better presidential hopeful to replace the president. And it's very frustrating hearing people say, don't shake the boat, don't rock the boat, because, we might end up with a Mabuza presidency or a digital vibes presidency. And those are all very valid, concerns. But ultimately, we can't, for the sake of, fake stability, overlook things that are wrong or, contravention of our constitution, because then where does it end? It happens now, and then what happens? Then it's just a complete erosion of our constitutional democracy. And I hope that South Africans also start to believe that there's more for us outside of the ANC and after the ANC, quite frankly.
Earlier this week, EFF leader Julius Malema said he would call on the DA to bring a MONC, a motion of no confidence. Does that sound like a good idea or a bit duplicitous?
So we've made it clear to the opposition parties, and this is exactly one of the examples, as I was saying earlier, that we agree on certain things and we don't agree on certain things. And so the opposition parties approached us to say we should, as the official opposition, file a motion of no confidence. And our view was simple, that in the National Assembly rules, there is a rule that speaks to, it's called the rule of anticipation. And our view is that if you've got an impeachment process already underway, overlaying that with a motion of no confidence will be ruled out of order on the basis that it contravenes the rule of anticipation. Because An impeachment seeks to remove a president from office in a very different way from a motion of no confidence, but the two seek to do the same thing. And if, hypothetically, the Section 89 process of impeaching the president is successful, it renders your motion of no confidence moot. But more importantly, so there's a technical reason why we thought this is a bad idea. We're not in support of it. We're not ruling out ever moving a motion of no confidence against the president ever, particularly when we've seen and this Section 89 process has lived out its process. But from a technical point of view, we believe it would be ruled out. But secondly, we also don't want to throw the kitchen sink at this to the point where South Africans start to doubt our motives around this. A Section 89 process, which is really serious, Michael, and has never happened in South Africa, is already underway. We have faith in the process. We have faith in that section of the Constitution and in the institution of Parliament for being able to get that work done. And so we need to also demonstrate that we have faith in our own rules that we have passed, and we have faith in our Constitution too. And if we fail, and should we fail on Tuesday, then we can go back to the drawing board. So this is not a matter of us, trying to, as some people have suggested, trying to protect the president somehow or in some way or another. But this is a tactical point, and it's also a strategic point where we also need to continuously take South Africans along with us.
To quite possibly the toughest question I could ask of you in the capacity you're here as, and that is there, but this is a question everybody will have been asking themselves, including the DA. Is there any scenario in which 30 plus MPs from the ANC defy the NEC and help carry the motion?
It's difficult to say because it's difficult in the sense that there are some people, opposition members, who say there should be a secret ballot, and the secret ballot would allow some people to break rank and vote with the opposition. And I hold a slightly different view. And my view is that, and this is why we had called for a roll call vote in Parliament. I hold a slightly different view in that I am of the belief that, as difficult as it is, if you are convicted about something as a public representative and a matter is brought before the House and you are absolutely convicted that this is a wrong call, I believe that you should be able to be brave enough and courageous enough to stand up against your party if you believe that this is the wrong decision to make and it is in contravention of the oath of office you took. It is a tall ask. It really is, because of course, it's people's livelihoods on the table, it's people's political careers on the table. But this notion that we also, these things have to always happen in a clandestine manner, behind closed doors, also just does not bode well for me in terms of an open and transparent democracy where your own constituents should hold you accountable for the choices that you make on their behalf in Parliament. Yeah. And so I think whether or not the Speaker grants a secret ballot, I think it remains to be seen what may happen. Maybe the factional battles in the ANC are that deep, and that, you may see people breaking rank for whatever reason. But my view, if people are convicted about the right thing, there's 50,000+ people who are attached to that seat, who have sent you to Parliament. I would think at least that representing them would mean a lot more to you as a public representative.
I read with interest a News 24 article recently, which the journalist is speaking to Gwede Mantashe, who's obviously the national chair of the ANC, but also an MP. And he's quoted as saying, "We have a duty to defend the office of the ANC presidency," close quote. Now, I thought, well, that's weird. I thought you have the duty to defend, protect, and uphold the Constitution. But maybe I misunderstood what you do when you stand up and you put your hand up, and maybe you can just run me over are we back in, is Honorable Mantashe simply revealing it's the same old ANC mantra that it's, party over country, no matter what?
I think that always has been the case. And I think, one, would not blame South Africans for having been optimistic during the Ramaphosa presidency. But if one looks at, how the ANC has behaved in this instance versus then, in the fifth parliament, you would be, forgiven for thinking it is exactly the same thing.